So, it's out there, it's on video. Anyways, thank you guys for showing up. As Jefferson said, I'm Whitney Wofford. I represent a member of the strategy studio here at GSD&M, and I'm excited to dive in. And I will be speaking for the bulk of this time. Hopefully, we have time for questions, but if not, I'm just going to run my mouth for 55 minutes. So, this scribe that you're looking at on the screen should match the scribe on your card. Did everyone get a card? And does everyone have a writing utensil? Awesome. Cool. So I'm just going to dive right in. What you're looking at here is the ancient archaic Hebrew noun devar. And what that translates to in English is an expression that we use called word, the actual word. And it's derived from a parent root that means order. Now, the verb form of devar is commonly found in biblical text, meaning to speak. The ancient Hebrew understanding of speaking or speech is an ordered arrangement of words. So, devar, word. Now, this is a noun that is masculine, and the feminine expression of this word is Devorah, which is in today's culture the name Deborah. But it also means, in the feminine expression, it means bee, as in the insect. And what's interesting about that is beehives are colonies of bees that live in a perfectly ordered society. So here we have the word devar, meaning word, meaning order. It's also a derivative of another word called midvar, which means wilderness. And in the ancient Hebrew context, the wilderness was viewed in opposition to the cities as a place of order, because cities represented chaos. Now, in today's world, we have a word, and it's called word. It's a little more boring. And its meaning is a single, distinct, meaningful element of speech or writing used with others to form a sentence, and typically shown with a space on either side when written or printed. Now, why am I starting today with a boring etymology lesson and historical lesson on the word word? I'll explain it. Today we live in a really interesting society. I think we, with no help from advertising, tend to do this thing called redefine words. We rewrite rules around them constantly. The second we get tired of what they mean, the second we get tired of what they represent, we will rebrand and reform words and language. And it's a weird thing that we do, and I could put a word out to you guys right now, and everyone might have a different articulation and understanding of what that word means to you. And you might think of it differently now as you do 2 months from now, which is interesting. So I argue that words are very, very, very important to society and to culture, and they have a lot of meaning. And so today's exercise is literally going to be an exercise. We're going to look at 5 words. And I'm going to try and tie them all together and make sense of them, but we're only going to look at 5. And the first word I will pose to you as a question, and this is where you're going to need your card and your pen. I'm going to ask you this question. You can write it down on the back of your card. That'd be great. And in this question has the first word we're going to unpack. What is your religion? Now, you might be thinking, what do you mean by religion, Whitney? Tell me exactly how you define it. Well, that's kind of the point. Answer it as honestly as you can to yourself and how you define it in your own mind. But the important thing here is just to write something down. That's the only rule I'll give you. Just make sure you write something down on the back of your card. I'm going to give you a few seconds to lock in an answer. And I'll throw a note out there. I'm not going to call on anyone to say their answer.
Yes, in the back.
Cool. I won't call on anyone. I'm not going to collect these or anything. This is just going to be between you and the signpost. But it is important that you write it down so we can make sense of a few things as we go throughout the next 45 minutes or so. Does everyone feel good about their answer? Or does everyone have something written down? Awesome. Cool. So I mentioned that we were going to look at 5 words. These are the 5 words we're going to look at, and we're going to start with religion. And then we're going to kind of start with something that's really ethereal, a little bit out there, and then we're going to end with something really, really granular, such as time. And I'm going to do a bit of a State of the Union on each word and see where we can get with this. So the first word was religion, but before I dive in, 2 of the pockets of this presentation are pretty infographic, statistic heavy, and I, as a purist when it comes to information, want to make sure I show you the resources on the upfront. I could spend the next hour qualifying the research, but that would kind of defeat the point, so just know that You're going to look at some information that comes from some heavy-hitting, really good resources. The Public Religion Research Institute is the first one, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that does this all day long for various types of studies. Pew Research Institute, pretty well-renowned, again, on public policy and public issues at large. They deep dive into a lot of different cultures and topics. The National Institute of Mental Health is the third one, and then we have the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Health. That's a mouthful, which is why they went with the letters. And then the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which got rebranded to drugabuse.gov. I like that. And then the last one is the only study of its kind that is done on a particular the topic that I'll get to. I'm clarifying it. I'm spending too much time clarifying it because, again, I like to reassure you guys with information. There's a research report by Cigna Health in partnership with Ipsos, which is a research firm, and it was published by the group multiview.com. I will tell you when we get to that information, and the only reason I'm overemphasizing it is because it's a research report done by 3 parties, which in and of itself is kind of someone stands something to gain in that relationship, so I just want to clarify. All right, religion, let's dive in. You are allowed to rewrite your answer if you want to, or just keep it. This is the definition as it stands today from Google. The belief and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods, a particular system of faith and worship, a pursuit or interest to which someone subscribes to as supreme importance. And I didn't even have to write this in here. Google said consumerism is the new religion. So thank you very much. I can close my laptop and walk out right now. So let's look at some information. I'm going to point out 3 big takeaways from the state of religion, and I'm going to do so with some data. There's a national decline in the Christian identity of the United States, and the reason I'm going to focus a little bit on the Christian identity is because historically our country is rooted in Christianity, and most specifically the 3 biggest groups in the history of our country of Christians are the white evangelical Protestant, the white mainland Protestant, and the white Catholic denominations within Christianity. And you can see just a general trend from 2006 to 2016. It trends down, dropping from 23% to 16.8, from 17% to 12.8, and from 16% to 11.4. So just a quick hit that the decline in the identity of the Christian faith is happening in our country, and the little subset of information there is the aging of this shrinking group. So just to paint that picture, this graph does a nice job. The top left represents the younger age group, the 18 to 29-year-olds, and the highest concentration of the faiths that they subscribe to, the highest one being Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and then the category that is described as the religiously unaffiliated. And then when you look at the bottom right, that is the older age groups and where they block out in the highest percentages, which is those 3 that were traditionally the majority shareholder value of our nation's faith and religion, the Protestant, Catholic, and evangelical Protestant groups. The next takeaway from the state of religion is there's a national rise in the religiously unaffiliated section of the box when this survey was done. You can look at from 1976 to 2016, the unaffiliated group has gone from 7% to 24% in our country. And another thing to note about this is the group of people that would write and check the box of unaffiliated is a very young group. And these 2 graphs paint that picture clearly, that the younger they are, the more likely they are to be religiously unaffiliated. The pink boxes here break that down on the bottom left. The unaffiliated groups are the pink bars, and you can see by age how it takes up more portion of the column the younger they are. Another takeaway from when we look at the state of religion is there is a decreasing closeness to Christianity. Now this graph is the one that I've probably looked at for the past 6 months with my jaw on the floor, because it's just an interesting kind of hidden thing that shows there's a gap in how we think of Christianity. So what do I say when I say there's a decreasing closeness? Well, when they surveyed the people of this, made a study, and those who checked they believe in God had the follow-up question with absolute certainty. And you'll see the 84% drops to 54%, the 80% drops to 50%. And then the questions below that are other further qualifiers to the faith itself, such as believing in heaven, believing in hell, and then believing Scripture is the actual Word of God. Those numbers just don't match the overarching they believe in God. And then the big hitter at the bottom there is religion is very important in their lives. The number's basically cut in half from the initial number of noting that you believe in general. So that's what I mean by decreasing closeness. And then the follow-up there is the secular nature of this group. So it's not that we're a country of believers or not believers. It's a country full of different types of belief. The biggest group, though, being the shareholder that has the biggest group is those who religiously don't identify, which is the pink slice of the pie there. And that is the 24%. And you'll see that Christianity obviously has a lot of the portion of the rest of the pie, but if you get a room with a traditionally Catholic person and you get a room with an evangelical Protestant and then a Mormon, you're going to have some like really entertaining conversation because their beliefs are quite different. So it is interesting that it gets broken out that way, but that's just kind of the state of where we are with religion.
Do you know like the time frame on that? Like
this is
how long is the 24 purple been the
Well,
largest?
how long it's been the largest, I think, since I don't want to misquote, but it's been for the past couple of years. This graph is a graph pulled from 2016, and the report is actually bigger now that we're in 2018, but the last time they did such an in-depth pool was in 2016. So this is a Stant research like study that was delivered by Pew Research. So I'm happy to send you I love geeking out on graphs, so I can send everyone the full reports. They just tend to be a little, dense. So one other really interesting thing to note about religion, there's this interesting overlap between religion and gratitude. And what you're looking at here is on the left column, the percent of people who feel a strong sense of gratitude at least once a week. Those who score the highest are the Protestants, the Mormons, and the Jehovah's Witnesses, and then those who score the lowest are the Hindu, the atheist, the agnostic, and those who note religion is not important within a worldview, that nothing in particular is what I believe in. And then on the right-hand column, it's almost apples to apples. Those who think about the meaning and purpose of life at least once a week, it's mirrored with those who think about it more, the ones that have the higher sense of gratitude, and those who think about it less have a lower sense of gratitude. So, what big takeaways do I want to make on this section? Christianity is aging out of culture and shrinking in population. The second takeaway is that the religiously unaffiliated is a growing and more prominent in the younger generations group. And the third is that religion is increasingly secular and decreasingly certain. Now, why am I talking about the young people so much? It's not just because I'm a self-righteous and overly entitled millennial myself. It's actually because of the fact that when you look at the populace of our country and you collect everyone of all the ages, millennials, as you can see, are currently a little bit tied with boomers, but as every generation does over time, they die, so boomers are going to go down. Sorry to break it to you. We're all going to die. It happens inevitably. So the boomer generation we're both at about 73 million, but what you'll see through 2050 is the millennial generation gaps every other generation, and that's due to us obviously being the children of the boomers, and then with immigration, our number is going to continue to go up within our country. So whether you love us or hate us as a millennial section, we're here to stay, and our voice is loud, and it's not just a loud voice, but it's an interesting time because the millennial is 21 and the millennial is 35, so you have a young, culture-heavy mind, and you have a maturing mindset, too, that is starting to grapple with the bigger things of life, politics, religion, maybe, but reportedly not so much. So religion is fleeting. That's the takeaway. But there's something that's typically associated with religion, and that is our next word, which is worship. One could make the assumption that if religion is fleeting, so would worship it would fleet with it. But I think that we're in an interesting state where worship is not fleeting. And yes, I'm referencing the new single Ape Shit. If you haven't watched the video, go watch that video and tell me that we don't have a worship culture. It was shot in the Louvre. Thank you, Beyonce, for proving my point today. So we're going to look at the state of worship. And this is the definition of worship: the feeling or expression of reverence and adoration for a deity. Now, there are some synonyms here that will help paint this picture: glorification, exaltation, honor, and homage. So those are good ones. But where do we see worship? We see it in a lot of places. The most, I think, token, easy assumption is pop culture icons. We certainly worship them, and that's kind of, a demonstration of praise, people gathering, hands up in the air. But we see it obviously in other places too. We worship government, we worship politics, we worship policy itself. We also worship the idea of love and the idea of fairy tale. These are the unfortunate few who did not make it into the church at the royal wedding. Just a few. We worship game, sport. We worship the competition itself. And we worship justice. We worship social issues that can change from day to day, from month to month, but we rally and we worship. So what is it exactly? If it's everywhere, what is it exactly that we're worshiping? We've put God aside. It's not God. What are we worshiping? Well, fortunately, guess what? I'm not the only one to ever grapple with this question, so you don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to go back in time to 1882 and quote Friedrich Nietzsche, who you've probably heard the name to some degree, Nietzsche. I have a little write-up here just to make sure I give him his credit. A German philosopher, culture critic, composer, poet, and Latin and Greek scholar, which makes sense that he would go back to original language and study that to come out with a really deep understanding of the world, and has been noted the father of Western philosophy and modern intellectual history. So he's set the tone for a lot of what we kind of ascribe to today, and he himself, with his philosophical righteousness, said God is dead. And that is one of his most famous lines. But the follow-up to that is more interesting, because he says, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe the blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves with? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? And I get chills every time I read that. And this guy has done all but predict to a T everything that's happened over the past 100 years in culture. So definitely well-read, well-researched man. So he kind of answers it right there. What do we worship? Well, you worship the thing you remove God with, and that is knowledge, that is intelligence, that is ideas. And so I hated giving Chelsea a title in my presentation today because I didn't want to title it, but that's where I'm getting at when I say we're in a culture of ideology, words. Let's look in, that's our next word, ideas, the state of ideas. And when you look at the state of ideas, we're going to focus on ideology because this is how we've wrapped it into our society. Visionary theorizing, a systematic body of concepts, especially about human life or culture. A manner or the content of thinking characteristic of an individual, group, or culture. And lastly, I like this one the best, the integrated assertions, theories, and aims that constitute a socio-political program. Sounds a lot like what we hear about in the media, right? We're in a religion of ideas, guys, and that is what an ideology is, and that is what has taken over culture. And I'm happy to take this debate with anyone one-on-one further after this if you disagree. But these are just a few that came to my mind whenever I was trying to type up a slide filled with ideologies. Certainly not an exhaustive list. There are more that would fall on here, and I'm, again, happy to discuss. So we're going to use this to move forward, but it's a lot, right? It's a lot. You're like, well, what word have you not used, Whitney? So how do we make sense of this? Where does this all come from? Well, I like to do that for you guys today. We're going to root the ideologies. I'm going to tell you exactly where they come from, and it's important to root them and nest them and figure out where they cocoon themselves. That way, when they manifest, which we will get to, you understand exactly where they nested and rooted and grew up and became what they are. So I'm going to use what is called a 4 C's method, and I figured that would be fruitful in a marketing group. If you are familiar with 4 C's or 3 C's or 5 C's, it's all the same. It's just 1 plus or minus C. So I missed a good one if it was 5, and I added a good one if it's 3. So it works out well if you do it in these C's, and this is really what a brand would hire a consultancy group basically to get a litmus test of where their brand is and the state of their environment, what their strengths and weaknesses might be. So the first one is consumers. The ideologies that fall into this, how would I describe it? It's what we crave and what we look for in brands, in goods, and people, and in the world we consume. And so this is just, again, not a fully exhaustive list of ideologies that would fall in the consumer lens, but it's certainly a list that starts to paint the picture. Corporations would be the next C. This is what builds business or develops economy and creates a job market. And this typically boils down to 3 things: more money, more people, bigger recognition. But lately, obviously, since innovation is such an important thing, better products as well is what can come about within the corporate side of the world. The third C is culture, and this is what fosters community, spawns debate, and builds momentum for society. This is a bucket that I personally love, and the list is very long. I separated it between more social culture and then more political culture, but I call these the isms of the world. You can look at a few that land more socially: activism, feminism, altruism, individualism, racism, surrealism, skepticism, and then the political ones are the heavy hitters that everyone freaks out about: socialism, Marxism, capitalism, liberalism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The last C is typically what would be noted as competitive advantages, but I'm going to call it competencies and unfold it by saying these are the tools that we leverage to maintain a competitive advantage. And those are data, content, and insight. In marketing, we used to say something to the effect of the customer is king. You might have heard that. And then lately, you probably hear a little bit more of data is king, content is king. And so those are kind of the 3 tools we leverage when we go after putting something out in the world. So those are the 4 C's. That's how they root themselves. Now, how do they manifest themselves if they root in these 4 windows? And I'll note that obviously what you already probably put together in your head is they're not mutually exclusive groups. There's a fair amount of overlap involved, but as we move forward, you can detect the pockets and just accept that there's going to be some overlap. They root themselves and then they manifest themselves. So they will come to life via an individual, via a brand, via a platform, and via a movement. So let's take a few examples and run through and see if it plays out. Individuals have ideas and have ideologies. A big guy that we love, I think we do, right? Elon Musk, the father of innovation, if I were to call it. And I'm not going to go through each and every one because it'll take too much time, but I did do the exercise of making sure this plays out to be true, and I pulled in the ideologies that he leverages the most, and that's why he even earns himself in a spot in a presentation like this, because he's really good at hitting an accord with people through an ideology. I also like to just shoot straight in the heart of Austin, Texas. So this, to me, is like the daughter of Forbes magazine right now. She definitely holds a lot of ideologies together and is that person that is the individual herself making the brand and putting out the message that is wrapping and wrapping and wrapping itself around the same type of ideology, which is what makes her a loud voice in a space like tech. Another guy that I know I'm guilty of giving too much time and attention to, Joe Rogan, the father of podcasts and YouTube and, I don't know, like casual drug use, maybe you could say. He's definitely a guy that comes in with that freedom, individualism mindset, and no one can own me, a little bit skeptical and a little bit all about the diversity of thought. And he just brings in a lot of voices and clearly has a platform itself, but people love Joe. Another individual that embodies some ideologies, I could just keep going, but Donald Trump, whether you love him or hate him, he killed it when it came to picking and choosing the right ideologies and playing the cards at the right time to spark time and attention from people to get a following. I could put Hillary in here too, I could put Bernie in here too. It's not just Donald, but the political game is truly like pick your ideology, find ways to wrap people around it and spur them and get them believing in it, and I will just be a vehicle, come vote for me. It's pretty simple in my mind. And just so everyone can exhale, Ellen. Yes, I'm throwing darts at Ellen. She, again, it's really more about the equality, diversity, freedom of expression and creativity, entrepreneurship, lifestyle, empowerment. She really kills it, I think, in terms of finding the good ideologies and just being an embodiment of them. Therefore, we worship Ellen. And lastly, you do not present a culture deck without showing Beyonce. And thank you again to the Carters for dropping an album for my presentation. She definitely has been just a mogul in the past few years in terms of how she's grown. You think of Destiny's Child Beyonce singing songs. You think of today's Beyonce, oh, she's singing songs, but she's sending a message. She's creating a movement. She's fighting the good fight in activism. So she's definitely challenging herself to stand for more and extend her voice into new spaces. So that's just a quick grab of individuals that have ideologies. We're going to look at a few brands that have them. Amazon is a great example, really just kind of looking at innovation and capitalism in general, but consumerism as well. I could take shots, but it's a brand that definitely knows how to gain a popularity vote via the right tool set. Another brand that I love, and if you haven't done any studying on this brand, not that you're one that sits around and studies brands in your free time, but Supreme is a great example. T-shirt, the simplest, most blank canvas of all time, slap a Supreme logo right in the middle of the chest, and all of a sudden you have a cult. Like, it's genuinely, every single week on Thursday, people in New York City queue up outside of their flagship store in hopes to buy this red T-shirt with Supreme on it. And what have they done? They've just been able to build that skeptical mindset that then captured certain culture and play the right cards of retail and of digital expression and creativity. And now they do collabs with Louis Vuitton and other brands that are well out of their design pay grade, if you will, in terms of fashion. Another brand we love that has dipped its toes into some more political waters lately, no pun intended with the waters in Patagonia. Patagonia, the president stole your land. That was a huge moment for them. Greatly received. I think it bolstered the brand reputation, but definitely a brand that stands for environmentalism and gets after issues outside of just making jackets for people. Another brand to look at is Glossier. Again, she's I would put her in the category of a Whitney Wolf, someone who is the brand, who built the brand, and who targets people like her for her brand. So it's really that triple threat of my ideology is fully me, and I will build a colony. So that's brands. Now we're going to look at a few platforms that have ideologies, and I think it's very obvious one is to throw out there is Instagram, because it literally is a place where you can go and find and self-select the ideologies you like the most. I love environmentalism, I love entrepreneurship, I love nostalgia, I love diversity and empowerment, so I'm just going to filter and make my feed whatever I choose and love. And then we certainly get a fair amount of feedback ourselves when we post. We are being creative, we are expressing ourselves, and we are in the loop, the hamster wheel, if you will. Another platform to think about that might not sound like the most traditional type of platform is music festivals. And I'm just gonna like point at Coachella, even though all of them demonstrate the same mentality, which is we used to have 1 or 2 standout music festivals a year, but now we have music festival season, and people take off work for the whole season to go catch every festival, or I know a few people that do that. And so what it is it's escaping, right? It's escaping into a new world, a different space. It's a little bit of the Halloween effect where you can dress up and just be a different person and get out of the normal. But you're also diving into a lot of different ideologies, following the artists that are sending the message that you like. Definitely a lot of recreational drug use going on at these festivals. And I love just the idea that it's an escape, because you're escaping into a sea of people that are sweating a lot. And it's a very condensed space, and there's so many people, but that's your version of getting out aside and getting away from the noise. So you can tell I love music festivals. Another type of platform is the more traditional type of news platform, and we really need to start to understand that yes, these are platforms, and they just are a hotbed of the ideologies of which are going to push the biggest red button at the moment, right? How are we going to get you to read our headlines, because that drives our money up, and it doesn't really matter what it says as long as it's going to piss you off or like make you really happy. I don't know. Either extreme reaction is what they're going for, not necessarily the truth, but I don't need to belabor that point. I think we all are there. And a few ones that just didn't make the list. How much time are we devoting to a platform like Xbox? Maybe not people in this room, but maybe you have kids, or maybe you have people in your life that will just sit ad nauseum staring at a screen playing a game in a virtual world. TEDx is a platform. This speech itself is a platform. Forbes magazine's a platform, thinking about universities on college campuses. And I threw Outlook in here just to point at everyone in this room. I know you worship that little icon on your screen amongst all of these other ones, but yeah, the idea of just being so inflicted by a certain type of platform and constantly checking it and giving it maybe too much power in your life is the point that I'm making. So beyond individuals, beyond brands, beyond platforms, we're going to move to the last one, and that is when I believe when the ideology supersedes the person, supersedes the brand, supersedes the platform, it in fact now has you. So this is when ideologies have you, and we call them movements in our culture, but it's just when the way that it gets expressed is beyond one individual source. So these are things like the March for Science. These are things like we're in the middle of Pride Month, so we're going to have a lot of parades. These are things like Women's March or International Women's Day, where we did finally give it a day and a moment in time to let it happen so it wouldn't happen throughout the rest of the year in unplanned for ways. These are things like Hamilton, which started as a playwright but ended up being #HamForAll and stands for immigration and does a lot of different work in that social category. We have reactionary movements to when bad events happen and we don't know what to do, so we collect ourselves. And it all follows the same format as you noted, kind of we don't know what to do, so we gather and we march in a street. And then just to kind of call out, these are the ones that were tracked the most in the past 18 months. So again, not certainly an exhaustive list, but you can start to see, wow, we really do have a wider range of movements that are just becoming us and putting us in a place where we go out and march. Now, I'm going to make a statement that might shock a few people. And I'm going to pause and drink water to suspend the audience. As advertisers, we are manufacturers of worship. I don't know if you've ever looked at it this way, but that's certainly what we do. We literally build things for people to go out and obsess over, which is kind of scary, but also kind of awesome, because I think the formula for how we do this is super simple. We crown an ideology that is most closely associated to our brand or our product that we are being hired to market for. We incentivize and reward engagement with that ideology, and then the how-to, the actual work that we get after, is building these paths that enable the degrees of participation with the crowned ideology. So To me, it's really great because we know what we do, and now we know how to do it even better. But I think the bigger question that I'm going to get at is beyond being an advertiser and just being a human being, what gives? Like, how much different is your life when you step out of these doors and you go into the world? Are you still a manufacturer of worship, or are you on the receiving end of any kind of worship that is something we might have touched on thus far today? Which brings me to my next point, the next word, which is reality, because we talked about ideas quite a bit there, because it was a big portion of how this comes together. So the definition of the word reality: the world or the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them. So we're going to talk about reality. And the first reality I want to talk about is mental health. And I apologize that this might be a little bit of a dark section on the presentation, but truth is truth. Noted here, I don't know if anyone is familiar with his artwork in the background. I wanted to call attention to it for a specific reason. This is Yayoi Kusama's installation Art Builds Out. She's very prominent in the art space. I don't know if I can get some nods here if you've seen her work. Cool, so some people are familiar. She does a lot of varying types of what we call infinity rooms. And I think it's interesting because we worship her art. I mean, this is the hot and heavy artist of the moment, or of maybe the past couple years. And she's an elder lady. She's, I think, in her late 80s. And just a brief on her to point out why I'm even spending time on her is in the mid-70s, she did a tour in America. She's from Japan, but she returned to Japan in ill health, where she began writing very shockingly visceral and surrealistic novels, short stories, and poetry. And in her stay in Japan, she self-checked herself into a mentally ill hospital, and that's where she holds her residence currently, and her studio is just up the street. So she lives in a mentally ill hospital and knows she has an illness, and has been quoted many times saying, "If it were not for art, I would have killed myself a long time ago." And I think it's just interesting that we obsess an illness. I mean, her illness, this is her manifesting what's in her mind and getting it out there. We call them infinity rooms, but the white one with all the polka dots in the middle there, this guy, is actually titled "I'm Here, But Nothing." And it's the result is an endless, infinite space where the self and everything in the room is obliterated. So let's look at some mental health numbers. 1 in 5 Americans suffer from mental illness. And this is a breakdown by gender, and then by age, and then by race and ethnicity. You will see that of the 1 in 5, it skews a little more female. You will see by the age, sadly, it skews very young. And then by race and ethnicity, you have a pretty diverse splattering of numbers. The Alaskan Native and American Indian group is the highest, and if you've done any research on mental health, that's a common thread. It's been that case for 30 or 50 years now. They do have a pretty big overlap between obesity and suicidal thoughts, and that's why their mental health number is pretty high, but they're going after that community and trying to figure out ways to mitigate such an anomaly to the group. Within mental health, a new thing is happening, and it's a really interesting, weird thing. We actually can't put a finger on it yet because we don't know what to call it or how to diagnose it or how to put it in a box. But it's called loneliness. And again, I love troping culture. That's a build out Burning Man, another prominent music festival that people worship and go to and are obsessed with. The numbers on this slide are the ones I referenced at the start from the Cigna Health Ipsos report. And again, I'm not a fan so much of these numbers, but it's the only legit report out there on loneliness itself. And they surveyed 20,000 Americans, and of the 20,000, 46% of them reported sometimes or always feeling alone or left out. 27% rarely or never feel as though there are people who really understand them. And then 43% sometimes or always feel that their relationships are not meaningful and that they are isolated from others. Another subset within mental health is and health in general is they call it an opioid epidemic, and there certainly is a bit of an opioid crisis going on. So this graph kind of breaks down from 2016, so it's much worse now, but what's going on with opioids, and I don't know how familiar everyone is with opioids, but they're the drug that suppresses pain and releases endorphins and dopamine into your bloodstream. Highly, highly addictive form of prescription drug. And what happens is basically it's almost impossible to not become abusive with the prescription drug because your body reacts to it in such a visceral, I need more kind of way. The problem is that it's a really, really deadly drug, and it's the biggest gateway drug to heroin, which is a very deadly drug that is not a prescription drug. But there's some interesting numbers there. About 80% of people who use heroin first misuse prescription drugs. And then here's a breakdown. 106 people die every day from an opioid-related drug overdose, and there's some splattering numbers there. I won't kind of belabor it, but roughly 21 to 29% of patients prescribed opioids for chronic pain will misuse them. And so we see just a lot of this opioids is a small subset in the larger problem of prescription drugs. It just happens to be the subset that almost often always results in death. So you're not going to result in death when you misuse Adderall, but you will when you might misuse oxycodone. The last, I think this second to last of the realities is the reality of BMI. And I'm a big fan of calling BMI BMI because when we talk about physical health, we don't necessarily think about BMI. We think about activity, and we think about body positivity, and we think about the feeling-oriented type of ways you would wrap your head around your body. But the scientific way of looking at physical health is called the body mass index. And what that does is it builds out categories based on your BMI, which is the percentage breakdown of what part of your body is muscle and bone versus what part of it is fat. And the way you get a normal weight breakdown is the 18 to 24.9% range, and that's percent of fat on your body. And so when you hear things like, we have an obesity problem, note that obesity is not just not normal weight, it's a rung removed from normal weight. You have normal weight, you have overweight, you have obesity, you have extreme obesity. So the takeaway here is the top graph shows you where you would fall if you wanted to go in and get measured. And then the bottom graph proves the point that 7 in 10 Americans are overweight or obese. So that's just a quick call out because almost every single heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes, and a lot of the mental health issues stem directly from your BMI. The overlap is incredible based on what category you would fall into and the other health issues you are very susceptible to having. And I could do an hour and a half on that and not cover half of it. So the last reality I want to talk about is media. And I don't think it's going to be a surprise what I'm going to show you. Maybe think about it for a second. How much of your time in your day do you think you spend consuming media? A lot, yeah. It's a lot, guys. The top line is the North American line, and the bottom line is the global average, so North America, killing it. As always, we like to gap people, but yeah, in 2018, we're spending an average of 620 minutes a day consuming media, and I'm not a mathematician, but that is over 10 hours of your day, which is virtually your entire waking day, either actively or passively consuming media. I think that's just a reality. Like, you might be saying, I don't do that. Think about it for a second. You probably do. You probably do. I don't want to spend too much time on that. This is just a quick breakout of where that might fall, and you'll note that YouTube and Facebook gap the other social media platforms quite a bit, and I suspect that that is because they are the video streaming of the social medias. They do more videos, so you can put it in a different tab, or you would watch more at length, so that's why it's eating up more of your time. And then the graph on the right breaks it down by age group and usage. I won't go into it. This is just part of my job. Come hit me up if you want to know more. So as we conclude reality, I just kind of wanted to create a tension here between your ideas and your reality. Now, I'm a very optimistic human being. I believe in human potential like nobody's business. I will go around, hopefully most of you see that on me. Humans are amazing. We can do so much. But my suspicion and my hypothesis right now is that our ideas, until someone gives me better evidence, are actually making our reality sick. And I don't like that, personally. So this will lead me to the last word that we have. I know I'm getting called out. I got a couple more minutes. The last word is time. Now, I want to lead you through what I think maybe you think of when you think of time, which is a 24-hour cycle. So give me a little bit of slack here, but within 24 hours, you're likely to be sleeping 6 of them. You should be sleeping 8 or 9 of them. I'm not just saying get more sleep, like seriously, go sleep 8 or 9 hours, you will be healthier. You're probably working 8 of them. Thank you. No, I'm working 10. Okay, cool, you're working 10. You're probably working 11. You probably do a lot of passive working throughout your day. You probably spend a couple hours eating or preparing food or getting food, some form of the food situation of your day. You're probably spending about an hour commuting, driving around. You're probably spending a half an hour working out, doing some sort of physical activity, but maybe not. And then you're probably, hopefully, getting an hour of family and community time in your day, and then maybe by the end of it, you have 30 minutes of just sheer free time. But I doubt that seems like it's a reality for you every single day. But then the 24-hour loop repeats itself. So that might be your day, but I like to think of time in a different way. So I think of 24 hours like this. I don't know if you see it in the top left there. Yeah, that's your 24-hour day. Boom. 24 hours. And then what happens is that builds over the course of 7 days, and that becomes a week, and that's 168 hours. And then that builds over the course of 4 to 5 weeks, which is a month, and that's 730 hours. And then that builds, as we know, over 12 months into a year, which is 8,760 hours. And I really wish I could have memorized these numbers, but the average American lives 78.4 years, and that's 78. That's a life right there. Men, you bring that number down. Women, you bring that number up. And so we average out around 78.4 years of life. Whew. That's a lot of time, right? Or is it? I don't know. You tell me. I'm not done. I'm sorry to be minimalistic, but that is your 78.4 years, which is 686,784 hours. And it happens to be stacked I'm getting a delay here, at the foot of thousands of years that have occurred before you, many lifetimes that have come before yours, and you are also in a weird place because hopefully what happens is life happens after you, and those will be all the lifespans and lifespans upon lifespans. So this is a rough articulation of humanity and of time, and when you get to this state, you ask yourself some of those questions. What does it mean? What is it all worth? Why am I here? And fortunately, a lot of people have done a lot of thinking in this space too. And what they've done is they have arrived at 2 kind of modes of thinking, and I'll present these 2 modes of thinking for you. One mode of thinking is, honey, you are a tiny little blade of grass in this infinite sea of grass, and your life does not matter. It's really small. Life will continue. It's comedically unimportant. Boom. That's okay, could be true. So the second school of thought looks at the first school of thought and says, yeah, that might be true. That's really stupid, but that's true. And the second school of thought tends to acknowledge the nature of time and its infinite scale, but it also acknowledges the value of your individual life. And it also says you are vitally important to what's happening, and it's happening right now. So without getting too preachy, because I can go motivational Whitney any day, I will make a statement, and that statement is that I tend to agree with the latter, the second school of thought. And I think that your life is infinitely important to what's happening. And if you look at this and metaphorically go with me here, because I think you are a thread of fabric in the bigger fabric of humanity. You're a tiny little thread that gets to get woven into humanity. And when you don't fulfill the capacity of your thread, our collective fabric of humanity is a little less colorful, it's a little less strong, it's a little less complete, if you will. And that's why words matter, that's why thinking matters, and that's why having meaning and fulfilling matters. I wrote here, I didn't know if I was going to say it because it's so corny, but your life is a record of immutable character that gets woven into existence. It's 78.4 years on average. It's 686,784 hours on average. And that's your life denoted in a line. And it's very similar to the line on the back of your cards. So this is where I put the ball back in your court, and you tell me how much of your time do you have versus how much of it has you. Any other corny question I could ask, but what do you make of it? So thank you for your time today.